We're blessed that the unalienable rights are secure here at home, but we all know the rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness don't just belong to Americans, they belong to everyone, everywhere. Today, this report sheds light on dark places where rights like the ones I described are infringed upon. I want to highlight this morning just a few examples of human rights abuses from the 2019 report that are happening in China, Iran, Venezuela, and in Cuba. In China, the Chinese Communist Party uses high-tech surveillance systems to monitor potential dissidents. It's imprisoning religious minorities in internment camps, part of its historic antipathy to religious believers. As I've said before, the CCP's record in Xinjiang is the stain of the century. It tries to hide what it's doing by intimidating journalists. Chinese citizens who want a better future are met with violence. In July, Wang Meiyu stood outside a police station calling for elections. The police arrested him, and less than 3 months later his wife got a call. He was dead. She never got an explanation. Instead, she was brought in and asked to identify a body so bruised and broken it was barely recognizable. Hello everyone, good morning. Every year for 44 years, the State Department has written the most comprehensive and fact-based human rights report in the world. State Department team members in Washington and our embassies work with experts in many countries to get the most critical work done on this important topic. They continually set the gold standard, and this year is no exception. It's a broad and challenging mission, but human rights are at the core of what we believe as Americans, and so we have to execute this well. To Assistant Secretary Destro and everyone who worked on it, congratulations. Thank you for all of your hard work. As our founding doctrines remind us, nothing is more fundamental to our national identity than our belief in the rights and dignity of every single human being. It's in our Declaration of Independence. On this issue, all Americans have common cause with freedom-loving peoples all around the world. The State Department's Commission on Unalienable Rights is exploring the deep roots of America's foundational belief in these ideals, and I look forward to receiving the Commission's work sometime around the 4th of July of this year, a fitting time. We're blessed that the unalienable rights are secure here at home, but we all know the rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness don't just belong to Americans, they belong to everyone, everywhere. Today, this report sheds light on dark places where rights like the ones I described are infringed upon. I want to highlight this morning just a few examples of human rights abuses from the 2019 report that are happening in China, Iran, Venezuela, and in Cuba. In China, the Chinese Communist Party uses high-tech surveillance systems to monitor potential dissidents. It's imprisoning religious minorities in internment camps, part of its historic antipathy to religious believers. As I've said before, the CCP's record in Xinjiang is the stain of the century. It tries to hide what it's doing by intimidating journalists. Chinese citizens who want a better future are met with violence. In July, Wang Meiyu stood outside a police station calling for elections. The police arrested him, and less than 3 months later his wife got a call. He was dead. She never got an explanation. Instead, she was brought in and asked to identify a body so bruised and broken it was barely recognizable. This kind of abuse is too familiar in Iran as well. Just a couple months back, on December 19th, I spoke about Puya Bakhtiari. He was a young engineer, one of hundreds of thousands of Iranians who protested the regime last fall. His mother, Nahid, was with him. By the end of the day, they were no longer marching shoulder to shoulder. Nahid was holding her 27-year-old son's body. Puya had been shot in the head by security forces. And the family's nightmare was not over. Since my speech 3 months ago, the regime has denied them the right to mourn Puya in accordance with their faith. When they tried to hold a funeral, Puya's 11-year-old nephew, his grandparents, his parents, and other relatives were all arrested. They've been released now, but live in fear under house arrest. Today, I want great Iranians like the Bakhtiaris to know America remembers those lost and stands for their freedom. The report also details abuses the illegitimate Maduro regime commits every day every day against Venezuelans, including extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, torture, and arbitrary detentions. Last year, opposition leader Elwin Mendoza was hauled before a military tribunal. His crime? His crime is that he protested in favor of humanitarian aid delivery. Maduro's thugs locked him up. Neither his family nor a doctor could visit, and 1 month later, he had died at the age of 34. My final comment this morning is on Cuba. The name Jose Daniel Ferrer appears 17 times in this report. He's one of thousands of political prisoners who, over the years, have been dragged, chained, and beaten at the hands of the regime. Tomorrow, he will be sentenced by a Cuban court. The spurious charges we've seen so far follow a pattern of arbitrary intimidation against Cuban citizens whose only crimes are to criticize the policies that have held that island back for 61 long years. We pray for a day when Cubans, Venezuelans, Chinese, Iranians, and all peoples can speak and assemble freely without fear of their own governments. The 2019 Human Rights Report honors those I've named and who have paid the ultimate sacrifice fighting for freedom and for human dignity. It's a service to those punished for their beliefs and those who continue the fight. It also promotes peace, accountability, and security by reminding every government of the high standards of human rights that they must live up to. And finally, this report is a sign of America's continued belief in the peoples of the world who challenge their governments to respect and uphold fundamental rights for every one of their citizens. Assistant Secretary Destro, well done. Bob will now take a few of your questions. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let me make a few opening remarks, and then I'll be open for questions. It's a great privilege to represent the United States in this forum and to work as a public servant along with the thousands of dedicated State Department employees who worked on this effort. One of the results of that work is the annual report. They look beyond law, policy, or statements of intent and examine what a government actually did to protect human rights during the year and to promote accountability for violations and abuse. As the old statement goes, actions speak louder than words. The 2019 Country Reports on Human Rights Practices is the 44th such report that we've had the honor to present to the United States Congress. The Department of State is required by law to report annually on the status of internationally recognized human and worker rights in all countries that are members of the United Nations. This year's reports summarize the situation in 199 countries and territories. The Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor works with our colleagues in U.S. embassies around the world to create these reports. We also work with them every day on U.S. efforts to promote democracy, protect human rights, and advance labor rights. I want to express my thanks to them for their hard work and dedication to this report, its accuracy, and more importantly, the greater mission it supports. Together, we support human rights defenders in a wide variety of environments who risk their lives to instill in their own societies the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms that we as Americans hold dear and take for granted. We must not, as these reports too often show, take these freedoms for granted. I think it's important to stress again that what we're looking at here is internationally recognized human rights. These are rights and freedoms that are encompassed in documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They are the products of consensus among a wide cross-section of global rights traditions stemming from different faiths, cultures, regions, ethnicities, and backgrounds. Our objective is to report accurately on human rights conditions around the world and to report both the good and the bad. It's easy for governments to say that they support human rights. It's harder actually to do so year after year. These reports provide accurate information and examples gathered from multiple credible sources. What the world chooses to do with the information is up to them. We hope that people will demand accountability from their governments. We urge that citizens of every nation will respect the individual dignity of their fellow countrymen and women. And we hope that the world as a whole begins to see, as we do, that respect for the inherent dignity of every person is the foundation of lasting peace and security. The 2019 country reports will be available to the public on the State Department website at www.state.gov when this press briefing concludes. Thank you, and now I look forward to taking your questions.